35 million. The Wehrmacht started its invasion with this number. It was the total count of Pervitin tablets ordered for the spring of 1940. For scale, that is nearly 1 pill for every citizen of Poland at the time. Evidence of a crime, not a military feat. The formula was simple: pure methamphetamine. The effects were instant. Fear vanished. Hunger stopped. Fatigue disappeared. 1 pill turned a biological organism into a machine that ignored its own limits. The investigation begins here. This was not a supplement. It was a mass pharmacological intervention. The High Command transformed the army into a collective addict to maintain the pace of the Blitzkrieg. The Wehrmacht issued 35 million doses in 4 months. 35 million pills led to the banks of the Meuse. The High Command saw the speed. They did not see the cost. A driver grips the steering wheel of an Opel Blitz. His knuckles are white. His pupils are blown, swallowing the iris. He sees a Soviet ambush in the middle of a French forest. It is not there. He screams into the radio, but only a slurred, rhythmic babbling comes out. Static fills the cabin. What was the medical term for this state? The officers did not know it. They ignored the amphetamine psychosis. They saw only soldiers who had not slept for 72 hours. The mechanism began to snap. A soldier stops mid-march. His knees buckle. He hits the mud like a stone, heart racing at 160 beats per minute. Others developed involuntary muscle spasms. Fingers twitched on triggers. In the quiet of the night, the line between friend and enemy vanished. This was the end of the campaign, but it began with the order to advance. Now, the advance turned inward. Medics reported a surge in psychological breakdowns. Men fired into their own ranks. Some turned their Lugers on themselves. The first casualties of the Blitzkrieg were killed by German bullets. Psychosis was a side effect. In May 1940, the goal was pure speed. The Blitzkrieg was not just a strategy. It was a biological experiment on the human nervous system. To break France, the German military stripped away the need for sleep. Pervitin was the fuel. Inside a Panzer IV, the air is thick with oil fumes and cordite. The loader reaches into a tunic pocket. He pulls out a paper strip. He swallows 2 white pills without water. His eyes lock onto the breach. Outside, the Ardennes forest is a blur of gray bark and dust. Could a human body survive 500 kilometers of continuous movement? In 1940, the distance from Berlin to Frankfurt became a single march. No rest, no hot food. Tank crews operated inside steel coffins for 72 hours straight. Red dust caked their faces. Their pupils dilated until the iris vanished. The 19th Army Corps reached the River Meuse in 3 days. This pace defied every law of military logistics. Behind the steel, the chemistry took over. Methamphetamine blocked the brain's adenosine receptors. The sensation of exhaustion died. Empathy died with it. The drug turned soldiers into cold biological machines. Infantry units treated civilians and prisoners with a mechanical harshness. Discipline dissolved into impulsive violence. In the heat of the Ardennes, troops opened fire without waiting for a command. One motorized infantry group drove for 4 days without exiting their vehicles. They slept for 10 minutes at a time, upright in their seats, engines still idling. They moved toward the Meuse without closing their eyes. While drivers lost their minds, General Heinz Guderian demanded more. He watched his tank columns tear through Belgium and France. He saw the speed. He ignored the psychosis. To Guderian, the drug was a success because the momentum never stopped. He viewed methamphetamine as a tactical necessity for armored warfare. Did the High Command know the risks? Guderian personally praised the effect. He prioritized the reach of his panzers over the sanity of his men. The generals knew the price. They chose to pay it. Army supply units acted fast. They integrated Pervitin into standard combat rations. They labeled the drug as stimulants. These were not medicine. These were fuel. In modern terms, the German ration pack contained substances now banned by every international anti-doping agency as high-risk narcotics. The logistics of addiction became official policy. Soldiers opened small metal tins. Inside, Pills sat next to crackers, canned meat, and cigarettes. Distribution expanded. It was no longer a tool for elite crews. Regular infantry received the same chemical edge. The result of this mass experiment was absolute. The campaign in France ended in 6 weeks. 35 million. Logistics officers issued this order in April 1940. The invasion of the West required speed. General Guderian demanded a breakthrough. To win in May, the machinery of war started moving a month early. From where did 35 million doses appear? The Temmler factory received the massive contract weeks before the first shot. Quartermasters prepared for the Ardennes. The forest was a bottleneck. To bypass the French, the tanks had to move without stopping for 72 hours. Human biology was the only obstacle. The Wehrmacht solved it with a chemical bridge. Logistics units packed the tablets into standard medical kits. Wooden crates rattled against truck beds during loading. Each one contained thousands of Pervitin doses. Distribution followed a strict technical protocol. Supply chains ensured pills reached every company at every stage of the march. No soldier was more than a few steps from a blister pack. The math of the Blitzkrieg was precise. For the 3-day push, High Command allocated exactly 833,000 tablets per division. The logistics of 1940 followed the data of September 1939. Poland became the laboratory. A 1-month campaign provided the perfect window to test the acute phase of addiction. The results arrived quickly. Officers reported a surge in performance. Fatigue vanished. Soldiers remained combat effective for 48 to 72 hours without sleep. The High Command saw the numbers and made a choice. Poland proved that Blitzkrieg required more than just tanks. It required a biological bypass of human limits. Temmler responded to the demand. The factory floor transitioned to a war footing. Workers packed millions of white tablets into specialized shipping crates. These boxes moved from Berlin to military logistics centers across the Reich. The transition from experiment to standard was swift. By late 1939, medical officers integrated the drug into basic rations. Distribution targeted the spearhead. Panzer divisions received the first priority. Reconnaissance units followed. The protocol reached the hangars and the docks. Medics handed the pills to pilots before long-range night raids. Commanders distributed the glass tubes to U-boat crews before they descended into the Atlantic. Before Poland, these protocols were born in the office of Dr. Otto Rank. Berlin, 1939. The Military Medical Academy smelled of alcohol and sterility. Rank watched his test subjects. He held a stopwatch. Rank did not see men. He saw biological engines with a design flaw, the need for sleep. He believed Pervitin could fix this. The goal was a soldier who could ignore pain and follow orders without hesitation. How much can a human body take? Rank conducted controlled tests. He handed out precise doses. He watched soldiers run in full gear. He monitored shooting drills. The data was cold. Pervitin increased physical endurance by 30%. Mental fatigue vanished. The drug blocked the brain's signals for rest. Rank recorded the results with clinical precision. Rank's math transformed the battlefield. Sleep deprivation no longer mattered. Biology was an obstacle to be bypassed. His research proved a human could stay focused for 48 to 72 hours. Rank did not invent the stimulant culture from scratch. He simply tapped into a habit already fueled by German housewives and workers. In 1938, Pervitin was not a secret military weapon. It was a household product. Who was the primary target for this marketing? Temmler did not focus on soldiers. They targeted exhausted mothers and laborers. The company produced millions of pills every month. They were cheap. They were everywhere. The drug infiltrated the German diet through the Hildebrand Chocolate Company. Each box promised a pick-me-up for busy days. Consumers bit into the dark squares. They tasted the rich cocoa mixed with the chemical bitterness of methamphetamine. Students used it for exams. Drivers used it for night shifts. Doctors prescribed the drug for everything from asthma to mood swings. Pharmacies could not keep up with the demand. Temmler responded by running production lines in 3 shifts. By the end of the year, monthly output reached several million units. While the Temmler factories ran at full capacity, the first casualties began appearing in medical clinics. The labs continued testing new formulas. They wanted more strength. They wanted better stability. Why did the doctors stay silent? Addiction was not yet a recognized diagnosis. Early users reported constant insomnia. Then came the anxiety. Hearts raced at resting speeds. Soon, patients complained of shaking hands and uncontrollable restlessness. Germany lacked a regulatory body like the modern FDA. This institutional vacuum allowed Temmler to ignore the mounting red flags for years. Clinical reports began to describe emotional numbness. Some patients descended into pure paranoia. The catastrophe began with a medical journal. In 1937, chemist Fritz Hauschild published a report on a new synthetic stimulant. He praised its efficiency. He detailed its potential. The substance was methamphetamine. The Berlin-based pharmaceutical company Temmler secured the patent. They branded the drug Pervitin. At the time, no one saw a threat. Marketing campaigns treated the pill like common aspirin. Visual, a promotional poster. Smiling office workers, energetic mothers, cheerful students. Pervitin promised mental sharpness and a permanent good mood. Was a prescription necessary? Not in 1938. The drug was sold openly in every German pharmacy. Temmler scaled up operations immediately. By the start of the year, the factory line reached a capacity of millions of pills per month. Hitler dominated Europe, yet he could not control his own hands. By 1943, the man commanding 10 million soldiers was a chemical wreck. He retreated to the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. The bunker smelled of damp concrete and medicinal alcohol. How did a chemical cocktail dictate global strategy? Morel opened his leather case. He prepared the syringe. Hitler watched the needle. His left hand shook violently against his thigh. He hid it behind his back when generals entered the room. The treatment was a cycle of collapse. Hitler felt drained. He demanded higher doses. Morel complied with a mix of uppers and downers. Methamphetamine for energy, opiates for the crash, sedatives for the chronic insomnia. Normal brain function ceased. The chemistry replaced the man. Hitler stared at the maps. He issued vague orders. He delayed responses to Allied movements for days. His mind focused on imaginary Wunderwaffe projects while the real front crumbled. The cost was absolute. His refusal to retreat at Stalingrad led to the loss of 250,000 men of the Sixth Army. In the silence of the bunker, Hitler whispered to himself. Then he screamed. He suspected everyone. He demanded new loyalty oaths. He saw betrayal in every shadow of the Wolf's Lair. The meth did not just keep him awake, it rewrote his reality. He believed in victory while surrounded by ruins. Morel pushed the plunger down. The needle entered the vein. The regimen continued. The needle was a daily ritual. By 1943, the man directing 10 million soldiers could no longer control his own pulse. The medical record reads like a toxicological report. 82 different substances circulated in a single organism. The list included methamphetamine, oxycodone, and morphine derivatives, barbiturates for the nerves, testosterone-based steroids for the ego. Morel administered up to 3 injections every single day. 82 separate drugs. This exceeded the contents of a standard field hospital's medicine chest. The chemical load manifested physically. Hitler's right hand developed a constant tremor. His posture turned rigid. He existed in a state of paradoxical exhaustion, simultaneously drained and hyper-alert. Witnesses noted his dilated pupils during morning briefings. The genius of the Reich was a product of high-dosage stimulants and heavy opiates. He paced. He whispered to himself. He stared into corners in total silence. Reality no longer reached the bunker. After the collapse at Stalingrad in February 1943, the facts were clear. The Sixth Army was gone. 250,000 men were lost. Hitler ignored the data. He ordered fresh attacks using units that existed only on paper. Generals attempted to show him the maps. They pointed to the gaps in the front lines. He removed them from command. The high command watched their leader, but no one spoke.
The needles entered the dictator's veins through the hands of a man without a medical specialty. By 1936, the inner circle had a new face. Dr. Theodor Morell. He was a dermatologist with a fascination for alternative medicine. To the generals, he was a charlatan. To Hitler, he was a miracle worker. Morell didn't use standard therapy or diagnostic protocols. Instead, he prepared vitamin cocktails in secret. Imagine the scene. A heavy-set man with sweaty hands mixing unidentified fluids in a dim room. No peer reviews, no oversight. The syringes contained more than vitamins. By 1943, the regime was collapsing on every front. Allied bombs flattened German cities. The Soviet advance pushed the Wehrmacht westward. As the Reich shriveled, Hitler's health disintegrated. He relied on Morell's needles to stay upright. Morell moved from a simple skin doctor to a high-stakes dealer. He administered 82 different substances to the leader of the state. Most were delivered by daily injections. By the end of 1943, Morell was the most powerful man in the bunker. While Morell's needles pierced the leader's skin, military chemists prepared a cocktail for the masses. The goal surpassed simple alertness. They demanded a biological upgrade. What happens if you mix methamphetamine with cocaine and a potent opioid? The answer was Formula D9. It was a chemical speedball, 5 milligrams of cocaine, 3 milligrams of Pervitin. A technician stirred the white powders in a glass beaker. The grains dissolved. One pill to kill fear, pain, and exhaustion simultaneously. The first human trials began at Sachsenhausen. A lab assistant placed the tablet on a prisoner's tongue. The subject swallowed. The bitter sting of pharmaceutical-grade cocaine hit his throat within seconds. The mechanics of D9 were simple and lethal. The methamphetamine bypassed the brain's fatigue sensors. The cocaine spiked the heart rate. The oxycodone numbed the physical agony of a collapsing body. It was a heart attack in a blister pack. SS guards forced the subjects onto the shoe testing track. They marched for 20 hours without food. Some prisoners began screaming at thin air. Others walked until their muscles locked in a permanent spasm. The data was clear. Subjects experienced severe hallucinations after 6 hours. Their nervous systems fired until they burned out. Several hearts simply stopped mid-stride. The Reich viewed these fatalities as successful calibration. They prioritized the drug for the most extreme environments. Elite Brandenburg commandos. Crews of U-boats trapped in steel tubes for months. Soldiers needed to be machines. But the plan faced a wall of reality. War chaos hampered the chemical plants. Logistic chains broke under Allied bombs. The grand distribution of D9 to millions of soldiers never materialized. The project remained a collection of classified autopsy reports. Non-humans. Dr. Otto Gross used this term in his official reports. It was his technical classification for prisoners. To the SS, these were not patients. They were biological substrates for testing the D9 formula. Gross coordinated every shipment with SS logistics units. He treated the camp like a high-speed laboratory. The doctors ignored every principle of medical ethics. They violated the standards that would later form the Geneva Convention. Gross monitored 3 primary metrics: reaction times, aggression levels, and mental stability. He recorded the data with clinical precision. The trials had no oversight. SS doctors expanded the experiments at will. If a subject died, the guards cleared the body. A new prisoner took their place immediately. No anesthetic was provided. No recovery time was allowed. Gross and his assistants pushed the limits of endurance until the heart stopped. They moved the experiments from the barracks to the open parade grounds. Gross and his SS subordinates moved their operation 30 kilometers north of Berlin. The parade ground of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp became a live laboratory. Why did the SS force prisoners to march in circles for 24 hours straight? The military demanded data on the absolute limits of human endurance. Standard Pervitin was no longer enough.
They needed a chemical engine for a super soldier. The process was a mechanical conveyor of exhaustion. A prisoner puts on a backpack. It weighs 25 kilograms. He begins to walk. The sound of hundreds of soles shuffling against the gravel fills the square. He completes 1 lap, then 10, then 100. 24 hours of continuous marching. This distance exceeds 100 kilometers without a single minute of rest. The guards watched the clock. They recorded heart rates. They noted the exact moment the legs buckled. When a prisoner collapsed, the guards dragged him away by the arms. A new one took his place. The march never stopped. The results went directly to military research divisions and pharmaceutical giants. There was no medicine here, only the technical measurement of how fast a body breaks down under stress. Doctors provided no anesthesia and no possibility of recovery. Reports from the front lines reached Berlin. They described men who no longer felt pain. One soldier marched through deep snow for hours with open wounds. He did not notice the blood. He did not feel the cold. His nervous system had simply disconnected from his body. This was the result of a pharmacological debt that could no longer be paid. The Pervitin failed during the first Soviet winter. Supplies vanished. Fuel ran dry. The chemical shield collapsed, leaving 3 million men to face a total mental breakdown. Some remained awake for 5 consecutive days. When the methamphetamine finally left their blood, they entered a state of deep confusion. Was it fatigue or a total break from reality? Entire patrols wandered aimlessly into Soviet machine gun fire. They did not duck. They did not fire back. In other sectors, panicked groups abandoned heavy equipment, fleeing from enemies that did not exist. Doctors recorded a surge in mass psychosis. Isolated and frostbitten troops turned their weapons on themselves. The human machine was broken. Some soldiers stood motionless in the snow for hours under heavy shelling. Others became violent without provocation or refused all food. Berlin received these reports but offered no solutions. The military had no system to treat the mind. Medical officers labeled the collapsing men as weak or undisciplined. To protect their own careers, commanders scrubbed the mention of drugs from official logs. They forced the psychotic remnants back into the line or transferred them to rear units. Officers buried the evidence of chemical addiction to avoid looking incompetent before the high command. The breakdown did not wait for the winter. It began on June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa launched the largest invasion force in human history. 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border. They didn't just carry Mausers and MG-34s. They carried millions of doses of Pervitin. The geography was the first enemy. Distances in the east were vast. Cities sat hundreds of miles apart. The roads were primitive tracks of dirt and mud. High command demanded speed. Methamphetamine provided it. For the first few weeks, the machine moved fast. Too fast. Soldiers pushed into harsh, unfamiliar terrain without sleep. The Blitzkrieg relied on chemical endurance. But the Soviet resistance stiffened. Supply lines stretched until they snapped. Food and fuel ran low. On the front lines, the human nervous system reached its limit. Mental and physical collapse followed the initial euphoria. Logistics could no longer keep up with the addiction of 3 million men. Supply trucks stopped arriving. The disaster in Russia was rooted in the fields of France. In 1941, the Wehrmacht did not enter the Soviet Union as a fresh force. They entered as addicts. The 6-week victory in the West had locked the military into a chemical trap. Performance required Pervitin. Short-term bursts became permanent crutches. Tolerance climbed. The human nervous system adapted and demanded more. Soldiers increased their intake to 5 or 6 tablets a day. Standard doses no longer functioned. Without the pill, coordination vanished. Withdrawal hit the ranks with technical precision. Tremors, uncontrollable sweating, and total cognitive collapse. The army was physically breaking before the first winter. The chemistry of the brain began to warp. Officers reported a surge in paranoia. Soldiers viewed their own comrades as enemies. In the heat of the march, the air filled with the sound of men screaming at ghosts. Hallucinations triggered sudden aggression. Men fired at nothing. Others disobeyed direct orders, lost in a meth-induced fog. They could no longer distinguish a civilian from a combatant or a friend from a threat. The system reached a breaking point. The drug that powered the Blitzkrieg now fueled a collective psychosis. Soldiers needed more than six. Hitler's physical body decomposed in 1945. His favorite chemical already prepared for a new war. The fall of the Reich did not kill the substance. It just changed its uniform. How long did the drug survive the surrender? West German doctors kept writing prescriptions for another 13 years. They treated depression. They fought fatigue. They managed weight loss with pure methamphetamine. Pervitin remained a legal tool for civilian life until 1958. The public accepted a dangerous premise. Performance could be bought in a pharmacy. The focus shifted to the Korean War. American commanders needed wakefulness. They studied captured Nazi records. They analyzed German endurance data. The U.S. military began its own exploration of stimulants. The chemical blueprints crossed the ocean. The Nazi experiment became a global standard for military drug programs. Science served the machine. Individual humanity didn't matter. The final trace of empathy vanished. Germany was not the only empire fueling its collapse with stimulants. Totalitarian chemistry operated with lethal synchronization. The Japanese military synthesized Philippon during the Second World War. It was a chemical twin to German Pervitin, pure methamphetamine. After the surrender, pharmaceutical companies kept the assembly lines moving. They sold the surplus legally. Did the problem vanish with the capitulation? In Japan, it was only starting. By 1948, the drug saturated the ruins of the country. Veterans used it to forget. Factory workers used it to survive 18-hour shifts. Teenagers took it for the rush. The military stimulant became a civilian plague. Between 1948 and 1951, Japan recorded the first mass meth epidemic in history. Hospital wards filled with a new type of patient. These people suffered from acute paranoia and violent outbursts. Police launched a domestic war against their own citizens. Mass arrests followed. In 1951, the government finally signed the ban. But the scale of the disaster was already absolute. 6 million people had been exposed to the drug in just 3 years. While Asia burned in a meth-fueled epidemic, the ruins of Europe became a different kind of market. The Wehrmacht warehouses didn't vanish with the surrender. They leaked. Stockpiles of Pervitin flowed from military depots directly into the hands of civilians. Truck drivers in West Germany were the first to adapt. Night hauls across broken roads required unnatural stamina. They swallowed the white pills to kill the urge to sleep. On the dark highways of France and Austria, the glow of a dashboard light often illuminated a tin of leftovers from the front. It was no longer a weapon. It was a logistical tool. The black market ignored borders and morals. In Austria, students traded tablets to survive exam seasons. In France, athletes discovered the same chemical edge that once drove panzer crews through the Ardennes. Most users never saw the connection. They felt only the surge of artificial energy. They treated the Nazi combat drug as a simple performance enhancer for a new peaceful world. Methamphetamine had successfully infiltrated the civilian routine. Cyclists began using the pills to endure the steepest mountain climbs of the first post-war races. The world watched the Holocaust. 6 million murdered. Compared to genocide, a few million pills seem like a footnote. This silence at the Nuremberg trials ensured the drug trade would survive the war. November 1945, the Palace of Justice. The world demands an accounting for the gas chambers and the firing squads. Prosecutors focus on the industrial scale of death. They ignore the industrial scale of addiction. The judges look at the high command. They see the architects of the final solution. They do not see the men who turned the Wehrmacht into a legion of junkies. The prosecution ignored the military drug program. Medical trials targeted those who carved up prisoners in the camps. But the systematic poisoning of 20 million soldiers, It was not on the agenda. The man who fueled the Führer sat in a cell. Theodor Morell, the chief dealer of the Reich. American forces arrested him in 1945. They interrogated him. They saw a broken, obese man with failing kidneys. The gavel falls. The sound echoes through the stone hall. It silences the truth about the needles and the blue tablets. Morell faced no charges. The Americans signed his release papers. They cited his deteriorating health as a reason for mercy. A man who injected Hitler with thousands of doses was free to go. Other SS chemists followed a different path. Some swallowed cyanide. Others vanished into the shadows of South America. Most simply lied. They claimed they were following orders. They claimed they were practicing medicine. Theodor Morell died in a hospital bed in 1948. There was no testimony. There was no confession. The architect of the Nazi drug machine died without a sentence. Judges in Nuremberg kept a strategic silence. The reason was pragmatic. The Allies wanted the data for themselves. The investigation moved from the courtroom to the labs. American officers entered the Temmler pharmaceutical factory in Berlin. The smell of scorched chemicals and wet dust filled the air. They bypassed the rubble from the bombing raids. They headed straight for the basement archives. Why not destroy the evidence of a crime? American intelligence began a systematic collection. The soldiers found thousands of files with Wehrmacht stamps. They pulled heavy manila folders from steel cabinets. These were not just recipes. These were the results of the largest drug trial in human history. Operation Paperclip saved more than just rocket scientists. It rescued the chemists. In 1941, German army medics already documented the truth. They recorded hallucinations. They tracked the exact moment a soldier's heart failed. They knew about the addiction. Intelligence teams seized the reports. They packed the boxes into trucks. The data traveled from the ruins of Berlin to the research centers of the United States. The military saw a potential weapon for the Cold War. The Pentagon kept the files for future military applications. Intelligence teams followed the tanks into the ruins. They weren't looking for snipers. They were looking for the chemistry of the Reich. On May 2, 1945, Berlin surrendered. The city was a graveyard of concrete and glass. The searches began immediately. US and British officers entered military bases and hospitals. They moved past the wounded. They ignored the dead. They focused on the supply rooms. Behind heavy steel doors, they found the evidence. Crates of Pervitin, thousands of pills. Some sat in frontline medical stations. Others filled deep, reinforced bunkers. The scale was undeniable. This was no secret experiment. It was a logistical standard. Investigators found more than just tablets. They seized SS medical records and field reports from military doctors. The data confirmed a total addiction. Every branch of the army had been fueled by meth. The Allies moved from the warehouses to the desks. They began cataloging the files. Specialized units started the interrogation of the chemists. Supplies in the military depots dwindled days before the Allies arrived, during the final agony of Berlin. Chaos replaced strategy. Soldiers lost their sense of direction. Methamphetamine had transformed the remnants of the Wehrmacht into unstable, erratic shadows. By April 1945, the Soviet grip on the suburbs tightened. Supply lines collapsed. But the depots still held millions of Pervitin tablets. The High Command issued the stocks to the last line of defense. They gave the pills to the SS. They gave them to the Hitler Youth. Soviet tanks did not face seasoned soldiers. They faced drug-addicted children. The boy was 14. He swallowed his dose. His pupils dilated. White foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. He gripped a grenade and sprinted across the open asphalt. No cover, no fear. A Soviet tank turret turned. The explosion ended the charge instantly. Inside the Führer bunker, Hitler studied maps of non-existent armies. He remained insulated by concrete. Outside, the reality was different. Teenagers dragged wounded comrades through fire zones. They felt no pain. Their nervous systems were short-circuited by chemicals. Volkssturm units surrendered in a chemical daze. Many could not form words. Some did not die from bullets. Their hearts simply stopped from exhaustion and overdose. Berlin became a landscape of rubble and drugged children. The organized resistance vanished into a frantic, meth-fueled slaughter. The city fell on May 2, 1945. Teenagers threw themselves under tanks, not because of courage, but because of chemical overdose. The Wehrmacht issued Pervitin to the Volkssturm to force aggression into inexperienced minds. Military commanders treated children like seasoned grenadiers. They handed out the same blisters used by panzer crews in 1940. The mechanics of the drug were simple. Methamphetamine suppressed the frontal lobe. It blocked the biological reflex of self-preservation. Adult dosages hit a child's nervous system with the force of a hammer. One pill triggered an immediate, violent psychosis. The effect was erratic. Some boys charged Allied armor with nothing but grenades and a chemical high. They lacked tactical training. They had no fear of death. Allied reports described teenagers screaming and laughing under heavy artillery fire. The high ended in a total neurological collapse. Once the drug wore off, the fighters broke. Some fell into a catatonic stupor, ignoring direct orders. Others fired their rifles wildly into the air until the magazine was empty. To pump children with drugs, the regime first had to put them in uniform. The order came in October 1944. By then, the German military was a hollow shell. The June D-Day landings had shattered the Western Front. From the east, Soviet steel moved closer every hour. Millions of experienced soldiers were dead or captured. Training centers stood empty. The Volkssturm was a gesture of desperation that demanded chemical support. It was not a regular army. It was a mass of civilians drafted to plug the gaps in a collapsing Reich. 12 years old, 60 years old. The regime armed children and grandfathers. Some carried outdated rifles from the previous century. Others held captured enemy gear they didn't know how to load. Most had zero training. Many lacked even a basic uniform, identified only by a cheap armband. Despite the lack of equipment, the Nazi leadership expected these new soldiers to hold the line against professional Allied divisions.